Chapter 4. A House Learns to Hold. Morning found Lady Lyanna with the industrious guilt of a woman determined to make herself useful to what she could not undo. She did not summon a council, she offered presents. The great house adjusted itself to her purpose. The green solar kept warmer than usual for Eliza's current preference for the east window, the blue sitting room bright for Annlena, trays of lemon, mint, hot water, and by some miracle of bribed market boys, 3 kinds of pickles trailing after each lady to their current place of rest like obedient dogs. She began with Elisa, because dragons were not meant to look translucent at the temples and shiver wrapped in a shawl in window seats. "You asked last night if my boy was cursed," Lyanna said, pouring something steaming and sincere into a cup. "No, unless it is a star's joke to be born under a sign that says, 'Will always mean well while knocking over 3 kingdoms worth of crockery.' He has been like this since he could walk, his knees bruised and his hands grasped at an apology." Elisa, who was built for certainty, considered the cup as if it were a minor enemy and then drank. "It fits," she admitted. "He walked through 3 elder rites as if they were puddles and splashed everyone within reach. If that is not a curse, it is a talent." She spoke, and Lyanna listened as if worry were a spool she might keep from knotting. The dragon's concerns were not theatrical. They were intimate, humiliating in the way vulnerability always is to the strong. She could not reach her fire. The magic that stitched scale to bone refused a second heart. She slept cold. Door frames bruised her. She disliked hearing her own breath. "Vulnerable," she said at last, forced and accurate. "We will be your scale for this while," Lady Lyanna answered. "Double guards without a parade. Second bolts no one remarks on. Women have been doing this for ages. It is just as dangerous if you are mortal. The only way is to lean on each other." The brazier popped, a small, treacherous spark. It caught the thin web of skin between Elisa's thumb and forefinger before a dragon's instincts could recall that she had none to command. The sting was nothing. The offense was everything. She hissed, more angry than hurt. Before the sound finished, boots hammered the corridor. Alaris shouldered the door with the rude efficiency of a man who had stopped negotiating with wood. "What happened?" he demanded, crossing the room already, taking her hand without asking and turning it to the light. "A spark," Elisa said, half mortified. He blew on the reddening spot. "I felt it," he admitted, fierce and sheepish. "Left hand, like stepping too close to a brand." He was gone as quickly as he had come, back to whatever task he had abandoned at a dead run. Lyanna had frozen, not from alarm, but at the clean simplicity of the lesson. Then she began to laugh, quietly, delighted as only someone who has discovered a truth she can use. "Ah, now I understand why dragons are rare," she murmured. "Men are not built to volunteer for labour twice. My dear girl, he is going to pay dearly for being such an oaf when your time comes." Elisa fought with a smile and lost. "Let's not tell him. He deserves a surprise too," she said with a vengeful glint. Lyanna crossed the corridor to Annlena, who had arranged herself among cushions with the unshowy competence of someone who learned long ago to be comfortable without asking permission. The older woman did not sit until Annlena, with their old, effortless intimacy, tugged her down and rested her head for a heartbeat against Lyanna's shoulder, as she had as a motherless girl after falling from trees but still too proud to cry. "My mother would have told me to be brave," Annlena said. "You always told me the truth." "The truth," Lady Lyanna said, "is that labour hurts horribly. We swear, we bargain, we promise never again. Then small hands take a finger and make liars of us." Steam's soft laughter. Then the other truths, quieter and heavier. Annlena's dampening of Katarin's storms had grown imprecise since the child had begun, as she put it, to hum. The focus at her wrist sang back to his power a shade too brightly. He fetched wind by startle, woke lightning by joy. What do we do when the fear makes the sky listen to him, and I am too busy to steer him safe, she asked. We are not too proud for our own good, Lyanna said. We are practical. We will prepare. They did not pretend knives did not exist. The child in Annlena's body had rewritten maps no one admitted having drawn. Men who had invested in Katarin dying childless had begun to see their investments thin. The first attempts had come softly plausible as misfortune. A carefully placed nail in a horse's hoof, about to be harnessed to her carriage, a loose flagstone at a stair-top, milk in a cup that would have passed unnoticed if a cat had not drunk it, and barely lived to sulk. The city loved them, and all of these had been noted long before they came to harm. They were still a sign of danger that could not be ignored. We cannot birth in a place with too many doors, Lady Lyanna said, promising to plan ahead for all of them. They worried about children as well, because to do otherwise is only superstition. Elisa named it cleanly. Mine will be human, she said. You cannot forge a dragon out of a mortal's bones. If there is a dragon, it will be asleep. Sometimes it never wakes. Sometimes it wakes at 2 years and burns the cradle. Early is easier. It grows with the child, and they grow as one. If it wakes in a grown body, she let the pause speak, it is feral. You must tame and fold it into yourself while you are already yourself. That breaks some. Can we know? Annlena asked. Yes, Elisa said. The oracle owes me a visit now that this has come to pass. She promised so when she gave me the prophecy of my mate. She will come and she will speak. But you cannot compel an oracle. She will come when it is time. And ours is not without burdens either, Annlena added, smoothing the air above her belly as if it were hair to be set right. I do not want a crown in the cradle, but we put one there already by claiming our place in the succession for the southern crown, and there are those who would help the claim pass on with a dagger. You placed possibility, Lyanna corrected, mild and fierce. We will make your child safe to grow and safe enough to choose when time comes. Passing it on to another is an option without requiring a life. That phrase pleased Elisa in a way she could not hide. Safe enough to choose, she echoed, tasting it. Good. May both of our children be safe enough to choose who they will become in the end. Lists followed, because lists are the practical woman's prayer. Only when she had braided their worries into something like a plan did Lady Lyanna set down her cup with the delicate satisfaction of a small victory and a larger campaign. We will build, she said. Elisa blinked. Build? A nest, Lady Lyanna answered. We have about 7 months to do the work now, just enough time to build. Not just a nursery, a keep, on the mountain opposite the pass. Stormproof, hard to reach. One gate I can wedge with my back if I must, but high enough you won't require me to. Annlena, who had come to the door just in time to hear the last sentence, smiled in that decisive way that makes realities take shape. Dragon's nest, she said. And that was that. Katarin arrived on the heels of her approval, eyebrows already framed around the plan. The north shoulder, he offered, pointing from the window to the black triangle opposite the tower. Basalt. Old and well-behaved. Goats approve the path. Wind crosses with less malice there than nearer the peak and curve of the stone shields the city. We can do it, Elisa said, arranging the world with both hands. Stone laid low and deep. Flat roof of stone giving no purchase for wind, and once the dragon flies again, can hold its weight like a square. Chimneys that refuse to be bullied because they are one with rock. Water from a clean mountain stream, high above human reach. No balconies, she added gravely, with a look for Lady Lyanna. Paths, Alaris said from the corridor, as if summoned by the word. A switchback that even pride respects. A chain hoist for supplies, enclosed against ice. Lookouts who do not confuse honour with being seen. Midwives, Lyanna finished. 3 old terrors who prefer hard spirits to honey. A birthing room with copper in the walls and water behind them. Clean rags enough to shame a monastery. And space enough for enough loyal servants to be comfortable, but not too many to become wary of. Lord Redder simply asked to see the city's supply ledgers and took on himself the arrangement of materials with a lifetime of experience in running trade routes and military logistics to back him up. It ought to have been absurd, but by afternoon the pass had already begun to behave as if foundations had been laid. They went up with a handful of masons, 2 foremen with the satisfied frowns of men given a job worthy of their hands, and ponies who judged every human decision and forgave most. News, because the pass is fluent in it, slid along rooftops and down stairwells. Some called it a watchpost, some called it vanity. But few denied the wisdom of it, for the prince and dragon's mate hunting for pickles at all hours had not gone unnoticed, and conclusions had been drawn long before formal announcements. There were enough smart people in the city to guess the implications, even if not with full accuracy. The city on the whole still loved their dragon and their magistrate, and wanted to do its part in keeping them safe. On the 3rd day after news of the undertaking broke, the Carpenters' Guild arrived with hats in hand and pride in their eyes. "You are building what will outlast our grandchildren," their master said to Lady Lyanna. "Permit us to be part of it." She permitted. Other guilds and trades followed, so sooner than expected the nest started to reach for the sky. By the end of the 2nd month the bones of the nest showed themselves clearly, along with the rounding of the ladies' bellies. The gate wore its lintel like a brow. The inner court slept under a temporary roof of canvas and intention. The copper-threaded birthing room waited, windows turned to the valley, door thick enough to turn even gossip. A narrow stair inside the wall curved so one woman with a chair could defend it. Below, a pantry performed its oldest miracle, safety by fullness: flour, barley, salt, vinegar, dried fruit, honey, and a small barrel of something inoffensive the midwives insisted tasted like courage. The dragon's nest was completed just in time. Both ladies were by then as round as the full moon. On the last evening before familiar linens and small belongings were carried up, Lady Lyanna stood in the inner court and looked at a sky so clean it looked newly made. Across the valley the old tower kept its watch and did not look wounded by a younger lower keep answering it. "Will it hold?" Alaris asked softly, as if doubting a wall could undo a destiny. "It will hold what it is asked to hold," she said. "The rest is people." He nodded as if that were heavier than stone. And they went in to settle into the keep that would be home from now on. Around them the wind walked the nest, tested its edges, and, bored by the lack of drama, went to make mischief elsewhere. The city below continued being itself. Above it, a new piece of the past learned, quietly, stubbornly, how to hold. Chapter 5. The Nest Learns Its People. The nest took to its inhabitants the way a sensible shoe takes to a foot, without fuss and with a quiet promise to carry weight without complaint. Morning mapped new habits. Elisa denied the sky, began charting sunlight instead. The exact hour the east window struck a golden square on the floor, the ledge on the north face that held warmth like a dragon's palm until noon. She claimed the window in the quiet room for her tea. She breathed out and accepted the stone armour the nest offered gratefully. Annalena discovered the slit window at the turn of the stair where wind sounded like a reed flute and the valley wrote itself in thin lines of smoke. A small desk appeared there, as if the wood had been waiting for authorization. Ink, paper, a smooth pebble for holding down corners, a cup for lemon water that somehow was always full. She kept the nest's tiny ledgers there and built her own routine. Kataran walked the wide open roof to the banister and enjoyed the view of the city he had already claimed and the kingdom that would someday follow. It was higher up than the tower at the mansion had been, and as he flicked his hand to wipe the cloud away, he smiled. This place already felt like home. Lady Lyanna was everywhere and nowhere, as only a well-trained household spirit can be. She found a small nook by the kitchen door that saw everything without being seen and corrected what needed to be corrected quietly. She confiscated the nest's bell rope on the second day because it offended her eye, braided it afresh with a strip of blue wool, and grey hairs she claimed were from Sleet's tail, even though some were too delicate to belong to a horse. She rehung it with a nod that meant now it belonged to the house properly, her own personal gift to the home of her son. Guards learned to walk softly on stone. The chain hoist learned to hum instead of groan. The house learned to call itself a home. Sleet, upon whose comfort the success of any plan had always partially depended, and who had moved with the family to heavy stone stables right before the last switchback, inspected her stall, approved the salt lick, explored her run, and submitted to a new, very small brush wielded with fierce dedication by a guard who claimed he did not like horses and therefore spent every spare minute with one. She did not know it yet, but her retirement was to be punctuated by days where she was expected to be a riding tutor for very light riders. In the evenings, the nest learned its song. The inner court gathered voices and sent them into the stone to be kept. Annlena's laughter at nothing in particular. Elisa's low contentment when the tea was exactly hot enough. Katarin's absent-minded humming when clouds moved exactly where directed. Liana's brisk affectionate orders. Alaris's soft tread on the parapet, like a man measuring his world by the length of his steps. Alaris liked the parapet best at dusk. The valley made its quiet then, not the hush of emptiness, but the deep note that comes when a day admits it has done all it can. He walked it with a mug between his palms, steam touching his face, the habit new and already old. Lord Redder joined him there on the fourth evening, the sort of arrival that feels like a conclusion reached by two minds, separately and at the same time. He carried a lantern and the look of quiet thoughtfulness. He was due to leave the next day alone for once to look after his own estates. Lady Liana would follow much later when she was content with the way things were settling. They stood a while without using words for admiring the view that did not require them. The city opposite kept its lamps like constellations caught in glass. Wind put its hand on the nest and found no purchase worth arguing about. Reader set the lantern on the parapet and reached for flint, out of a long habit of keeping his secrets. His hand stopped halfway, stilled by an understanding that perhaps it was time the now-grown man next to him knew, and held his palm over the wick. It was nothing. A figment. A thought given breath. Flame licked up. Small, precise, obedient as a well-trained hound, and the lantern's little world woke in gold. Alaris turned his head, not startled so much as reorganized. "I did not know," he said, and meant both the trick and the quiet that went with it. "No one needs to," Redder answered. "It is not much. Enough to light a candle, a torch. Enough to warm a cup. Useless for glory, sufficient for soup. And enough to disqualify a man from fatherhood by the conventional routes." Alaris took that in the way he had taken orders in bad weather, carefully, without moving the rest of his body until he was sure this piece fit alongside everything else. "Is that why?" he began, then stopped, because some questions are not questions but doors that have to be opened by the person whose house you are entering. Redder closed the lantern's door. "The northern houses like their heirs tidy," he said. "Men with stray magics are better used where wars contain them and hardships test them." He glanced at Alaris once, measured, then back to the flame. "Your father, your first, was one of my men," he said, "not reverent, not careless, exact. We trained together and fought together and learned the names of one another's worst habits. When he died, I drew lots with the others for the duty none of us wanted. Who would carry the news to the widow? I drew the short straw. I thought it was a punishment. I found your mother very round, in a little house that kept the cold out by stubbornness and good sweeping. I told her, and she wept with her hand resting on you, still in her womb." He paused then, but only because the memory was worth the reverence. I stood there and understood there was a way the gods might offer me a child after all. I offered her first only what a decent man can. My roof, a place at my table, and my protection. When mourning was done and you were learning to walk, I offered more. My name on paper, my hand for practical matters, my presence as father to the boy, without other expectations. She accepted the first part because she is sensible. She accepted the second part because she believed I would be a good father. We married. We lived like two people allied by respect for nearly 2 years. He flicked his eyes up then, amused at himself. And then nature decided it was tired of our virtue and took matters in hand. Our marriage became real. No other children came of it as expected. I was content. One rascal was sufficient aggravation. The last word held pride so clean it scrubbed the jest bright. They were quiet for a while, the lantern comfortable between them. A small moth visited, changed its mind, left the circle of light for the honest dark. Alaris had a vague memory of that time when he had been 4 and his mother's usually serious face had started to wear smiles again. He felt a new appreciation for the man for bringing happiness to his mother. "I did not make you," Reda said at last. "I made a choice and I keep making it. That is fatherhood as I understand it. Blood is a ledger. I prefer promises." Alaris felt his throat constrict, and then words he had been long carrying but had never said came forth, because now was precisely the time to say them. "You made me," he said quietly. "One small act of parenting at a time. How to ride a horse, how to hold a sword, how to carry honor and keep oaths. You taught me which fear to obey and which to fight. If that is not fathering, I do not know what is." Reda's mouth eased into something like a smile that did not show teeth and therefore meant more. He picked up the lantern. The flame nodded. "My grandchildren, both the one you sired and the one you caused by more circumspect means, and I choose to consider my grandchild too," Reda added, as if mentioning something long settled just for setting the tone. "Will likely set something on fire or cool wind into a room that does not need it. They will not be tidy or grow up following neat lines of expectation. The world can make room for being worth the trouble." Alaris nodded solemnly. "I am proud of the man you have grown into being," he said at last quietly to Alaris, who had just finished his tea. They went back inside in companionable silence and with new mutual respect between them. The nest breathed the way new houses do when they have decided to be old. Deliberate, patient, a little smug. Outside, goats rearranged themselves into more comfortable heaps. Above, the stars, which care nothing for ledgers and much for promises kept, blinked approval and refused to explain anything. Chapter 6. The Bell in the Storm. Alaris and Katarine were both in the city when the nest called. Alaris doubled over in the middle of the cloth market, the world narrowing to a white ring as a pain that wasn't his cinched him from spine to navel. He braced one hand on a bolt of linen, breathed twice the way an old midwife had taught him to do for someone else, and then straightened into motion. Already running. Across the square, Katarin flinched at a neat, mean flick of lightning that snapped from his own palm to the iron lip of a fountain and went out with a hiss. He was puzzled for a moment. Then the braided bell in the far tower gave tongue. The rope Lady Lyanna had braided herself with blue wool and grey hairs was being pulled on with clear urgency. They rode as if the road were a string being wound back onto a spool. The wind, recognizing its master's urgency, stayed on their backs. Ravens ghosted ahead, and then fell back, making an arrow of their bodies toward the black triangle of rock opposite the city, where the nest hunched close to the mountain like a muscle. Storm made a fortress out of the air itself. Lightning stitched the ridge with a dressmaker's fast, stubborn hand. Rain came hard from every unhelpful angle. If anyone had been minded to approach with ill intent, the weather would have eaten them without so much as wetting its lips. Inside, the copper-woven walls drank charge and said nothing about it. Water ran behind plaster in quiet sheets, the floor underfoot held steady like a palm. Midwives ruled the small world with clean hands and voices that turned princes into furniture. Lady Lyanna, who had put her hair up as for a battle she intended to win, met Alaris at the turn of the stairs and caught him by the waist as another sharp pain took his breath with a thief's efficiency. "Oh, my dear oaf," she said, half tender, half exasperated, eyes bright with the remembered ache of birthing the boy. "This is the price of knocking over the crockery. I warned you. You brought your misery on yourself. I am allowed to laugh." "I can bear it if she can," he managed to mutter scornfully, white to the lips. And then a midwife swept him aside with a fingertip and a glare that had frightened worse men. Katarin found the copper basin of river stones set for him in the birthing room and put both hands into it without being told. The first surge that tried to get clever ran up his wrist and met the copper in the lintel and the water in the walls and died without fuss. He looked at Annlena and she looked back, and between them the old, quiet binding did its work, her breath telling his weather what was wanted, his control holding the edges of a storm that insisted on pacing the parapet like a sentinel. Elisa laboured in her room like a creature who had always refused to make a show of thresholds. She narrowed her eyes and took the world's jaw in her hand and told it where to be. She did not roar more than absolutely necessary. When her child came, the storm outside paused for a heartbeat, one brief held breath, and then went on with its noisy guarding, as if embarrassed at having noticed tenderness. "A girl," the smallest midwife announced with the flat, triumphant calm of someone who would accept applause only if it arrived already folded. "Perfect." Elisa, who had no use for perfect, counted fingers and toes anyway, and then made a sound soft enough to be a prayer and far too practical to be mistaken for one. Minutes later, as if a chord were resolving, Annlena's body answered the same summons. The wind changed key, a small power hummed along the skin of those listening to such things. "A boy," said the midwife, already checking the mother's pulse, her mouth tight with professional satisfaction. "Good, good." Annlena's smile, tired, astonished, wholly herself, made the room warmer than any brazier. The nest, which knew how to keep, learned instantly how to cradle. Fathers fared less gloriously. Alaris sat with his back against the whitewashed wall, the child in his arms and apology to Elisa stumbling over itself on his tongue, as if sorry might take the sting from the next stolen breath. "I am so," he began, and Lady Lyanna, passing by with a basin, smacked his calf lightly with her foot. "Stop apologising and hold your daughter properly," she said. "You are doing the only useful thing you can. You may resume guilt on even-numbered days, if it comforts you." Katarin, a strip of wet hair stuck ridiculously to his forehead, looked down at the boy in his hands and felt it. The smallest answer, like the first acceptance of flame at a wick. Not loud, not a threat. Present, a spark that would learn its name day by day. He exhaled a sound with the shape of a vow inside it. "I will not fail you the way I was failed by my parents," he told the downy, unimpressed skull. "If I cannot do right by you, to teach you to hold your storm, I will learn better and then try again." It was not poetry. It was better than poetry. It was a promise. The storm took itself apart at last, having spent all its good manners and most of its anger. The nest sighed into calm. Women slept. Men tried to, but failed. Morning came clean and busy. The valley wore rinsed light. Ravens announced whatever ravens announce after a satisfactory night. In the quiet room, Eliza had already discovered what every creature who has ever devoted itself to endurance knows. When a limit lifts, the body will go find it again just to be sure. She left the child, so small she seemed a rumour rather than a person, into Alaris's arms and did not ask permission. "I will be back. If she is hungry, take her to Annlena," she said. "Try not to apologise the entire time." "I hoped you'd take me," he protested. and hated himself for the thread of boyishness in it. "I do not want to," she said, eyes alight with a feral joy he had never seen survive on her face this long. "I have shared my body for months. For once I will go alone and be large without being careful." She kissed the child's brow, kissed his, and then walked out to the parapet. The change came back to her like a language remembered after long disuse. Power opened its old books and read itself aloud. Silk became scale with the obedience of water deciding to be ice. Wings unfurled in a space designed to forgive such choices. When the dragon went off the parapet into that morning's perfect air. Alaris stood with his daughter against his chest and watched the emerald shape take back the sky. The ache of not being there tugged at him, insultingly ordinary. Lady Lyanna, who had the right to cut sentiment into useful pieces, came to stand beside him and did so. "Welcome to fatherhood," she said. "It involves holding the most important thing in the world and not going to the place you wish to be. She will need time alone now and then, just as you will. So will Annlena. Praise the saints if any of you are sensible enough to take it." "She could have taken me," he muttered, with the unconvincing resentment of a man who already knew he would rather be exactly where he was. "No, she could not. She needs to be herself again," Lady Lyanna stated firmly. "Cherish it while you can, soon your daughter will be too big to carry." He looked down. The child had settled a fist around the edge of his shirt and was sleeping with the ferocious abandon of the new. Something in his chest, still raw from the night's borrowed pain, reassembled itself around the grip. Across the gorge, a green shape became a line, and then a shimmer, and then, for a heartbeat, nothing you could point to.